السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. صلى على محمد وآل محمد. If I can kindly ask my dear brothers and sisters to please go ahead and be seated, and if we can keep the hall quiet so we can start the program inshallah momentarily. Please have a seat, and I really appreciate all our young men and women actually helped us with the chairs tonight. Welcome for the 7th night of Muharram programs at IECOC. I hope in these few nights that we've been here, we have gained enough of positive energy, and we've learned about the Imam himself as well as all those information that we gathered. Hopefully we can implement them in our lives, inshallah. We're going to continue these programs, inshallah, for another, I believe, 5 more nights until Tuesday night is going to be the last night of the program. Tuesday is going to be Ashura. We have 2 sessions, one at noon or before noon. Actually, it started at 10 o'clock. And that's going to be for the recitation of the Maqtal, both in English and Farsi, inshallah. We would like to see you all, inshallah, here for the nights to come and the day of Ashura as well. There is the Imam Hussein blood drive. If you want to get more information on your way out, please pick up one of the flyers as you leave. We need your support and help for providing the dinners of these nights. As you see, alhamdulillah, this year we have, our audience is more than the past years, and that requires more of your help. So we really appreciate if you can help us out with that, and you can give your donations or anything, any support that you want to have to me or Brother Mushtaba or the ones who are working here. We're going to recite a few verses of the Holy Quran, and then we'll invite our Honorable Sayyid al-Qazwini to the podium. But before I recite, please recite for the reappearance of our Imam of the time a loud salawat. And if you want to follow with us, we're going to be reading Surah Al-Ahzab, Ayah 12, I believe. No, actually, it is going to be 20, 21, 22, 23, and maybe 24. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لقد كان لكم في رسول الله أسوة حسنة لمن كان يرجو الله واليوم الآخر وذكر الله كثيرا. ولما رأى المؤمنون الأحزاب قالوا هذا ما وعدنا الله. زادهم إلا إيمانا وتسليما. وما كان لمؤمن ولا مؤمنة إذا قضى الله ورسوله أمرا أن يكون لهم الخيرة من أمرهم ومن يعص الله ورسوله فقد ضل ضلالا مبينا. وإذ تقول للذي أنعم الله عليه وأنعمت عليه أمسك عليك زوجك واتق الله وتخفي في نفسك ما الله مبديه وتخشى الناس والله أحق أن تخشاه. فلما قضى زيد منها وطرا زوجناكها لكي لا يكون على المؤمنين حرج في أزواج أدعيائهم إذا قضوا منهن وطرا وكان أمر الله مفعولا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum jami'an. Please help me invite our Honorable Sayyid Hadi Al-Qazwini to the podium with the salawat.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلى الله وسلم عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله. صلى الله وسلم عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. يا غريب يا مظلوم يا شهيد كربلاء يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. اللهم صل على محمد. قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ونفس وما سواها فألهمها فجورها وتقواها قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها. God states in the Holy Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and by the soul and the one who fashioned it, and inspired it as to what makes it iniquitous or reverent. Indeed, he prospers who purifies it, and indeed, he fails who obscures it. Amanna billah, sadaqallahu al-aliyyul azim. Let us enliven and enlighten our hearts and our minds and our gathering with the remembrance of the Holy Prophet and his purified progeny. Sallu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. When we recall the events surrounding Ashura and Karbala, we find that we are faced with many theological questions. Questions that deal with the nature of God and God's attributes and characteristics and God's relation to the creation, and in particular to humankind. For example, we read that Imam Hussein alayhi salam, before his death, he proclaimed, he is reported to have said, Sha Allah an yarani qatila. God wills, or God has willed to see me killed. In another example, we read that Yazid, after the Ashura episode, after Al-Imam Zayn al-Abidin and the women and children, they were taken captive. They were taken first to Kufa, we know, and then from Kufa they were taken to Damascus, to the court of Yazid. That Yazid, he turns to As-Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam, and he asks her a question. He tells her, كَيْفَ رَأَيْتِ صُنْعَ اللَّهِ بِأَخِيكِ. How do you see what God did to your brother? How do you see what God did to your brother? And we know that As-Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam, she replied so courageously, so valiantly. She told him, مَا رَأَيْتُ إِلَّا جَمِيلًا. She's telling him, Yazid, you are wrong in attributing what has happened to God. You are responsible. And you cannot run away from your responsibility. But even if for the sake of argument we agree that it is God who did this, I am in complete accord. I submit completely. I have seen nothing but beauty. Look at the faith of As-Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam. Look at her strength. Oftentimes we portray As-Sayyida Zainab as, we depict her as being Ummul Masa'ib, the one who experienced so many tragedies. But we have to look at the strength of the character of this woman. How strong she was in her character, in her stand, in her patience, in her perseverance, in her faith and dependency on God. Sublime character that As-Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam had. So here we find these two examples. One example in which Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he says that God willed to see me killed. And Yazid, he says, he attributes the act of the murder, of the killing of Imam Hussein to God. كيف رأيت صنع الله بأخيك. And so, both are referring to God's will and God's actions. So the question that comes up is, who is responsible for the Ashura tragedy? Who is responsible? Is God responsible? If it's God's will that Ashura were to occur, that Imam Hussein were to be killed, if this was God's will, does this mean that God is responsible? Who is responsible? So we begin the discussion tonight with this very important theological question. And that is, how do we interpret, how do we understand God's will or power, what is known as al-qada, qada Allah, God's will or power? How do we understand it in relation to human will and actions? As human beings, do we have free will? Do we have choice? Do we act? Who is the one behind our actions? Do we have the free will to act? Or our actions, are they predetermined by God? And that we have no agency and we have no power. This was a very important and enduring question, a distinctive disagreement that many different theological schools within Islam, they had beginning from the early period of Islamic history. In fact, according to some scholars and researchers, they say that this topic within Islam, it was not a new topic. Other religious traditions had also discussed the issues of free will, of determinism, of predestination, and so on and so forth. But within Islam, this topic came out. It was initiated in the early Umayyad period. And we'll come back to this point. This point about free will and destination and how it relates to the early Umayyad period. So this was a question that proponents of what would become various theological schools and trends within Islam, they debated heavily over this question. Over free will, human free will, power, agency, and how it relates to the will and power of God. According to some scholars, they tell us that up to 17 different opinions emerged. Theological opinions emerged. Now tonight, I'd like to examine some of the most important. We'll focus on 4. One of the opinions is that of absolute or crass determinism, which is known in Arabic as al-jabr. This was a position that was formulated, the proponents of this position, who are known in the literature as al-jabriya or al-mujabbira, or the determinists. They essentially denied both human choice and human agency. They suggested that human beings, they have no free choice. They're not able to choose freely. Not only that, but they also lack agency, meaning they lack the power to act. So neither do they choose, nor do they in fact act. And that all human actions, they are fully determined and unilaterally instantiated by God. God is the source of all human actions. Humans have no choice, and they have no power and no agency. And so the human being here is just a tool for God. When the human being acts, this is only apparent. When we get up, when we sit down, when we speak, when we eat, when we walk around, this is all God acting. It's not the human, because the human, according to this position, the human being has, number 1, no free choice, no free will, and number 2, no agency or power to translate that will into action. Now, historically, when we come back to the history, and we go and we try to look into the history, it's not very clear which of the major schools of theology within Islam actually adopted this position. But what is interesting is that we find most of the theological schools, they were accused of having this taking up this position by their adversaries. So if you wanted to accuse the other side, the other theological school, your opponents, you would often accuse them of being what? Mujabbira or Jabriya, crass determinists. And in fact, many of the schools themselves, their proponents would write works and tracts refuting these allegations and these accusations against them. But what we do see is that this position was one that was used to justify Umayyad rule. As I mentioned, this debate, it began in the early Umayyad period, right? Only a few decades after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family. But this position, that of crass determinism, absolute determinism, that human beings have no will or power of their own, and that everything goes back to God, this position was used to justify the rule of the Umayyads. And this is why when we come back to some of the early literature, you find this especially in the Arabic poetry. The poets at the time, we know that of course the Arabs at the time, many of them had oratory skills. This was the way that they communicated with one another. And so many of them, they communicated in poetry. They had the skill of developing poetry. Some of them were better poets than others. But some of the poetry of that early period, it has remained. It has been recorded. So for example, you take the poet who was known as Jarir ibn Atiyah. Jarir ibn Atiyah, he was born in the early Umayyad period. He wasn't born during the life of the Prophet. After the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family, he was well known, an Arab poet. His diwan, his collection of poetry remains. When you come to his poetry, you find that it is filled with praise and benediction to the caliphs of Bani Umayyah in different ways. He uses his skill, his oratory skills, his eloquence to praise the Umayyads. And in one particular line, he notes the following. He says, Allahu tawwaqaka. This is in praise of Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, one of the Umayyad caliphs. He says, Allahu tawwaqaka al-khilafata wal-huda. That God bestowed upon you al-khilafa, succession, wal-huda, and guidance. God gave it to you. God presented you with al-khilafa. And then he says, Wallahu laysa lima qada tabdeelu. And we know that anything that God decrees cannot be changed. They would use this to justify, to say that the Umayyads, they have been placed in their positions by God. God has elected them. God has chosen them. The corollary of this would be what? That if you disobey the caliph, or if you disobey the agent of the caliph, this means that you have disobeyed God, that you have rebelled against God. Now, when we understand this, we realize, sometimes, I mentioned this, sometimes it's kind of astonishing when we read the early history, and you see that when Imam Hussein's family were taken to Kufa and they were taken to Damascus, there were large groups of people who expressed their happiness. Now, when we think about it, how is this possible? How is it possible that people experience happiness at the misfortunes, at the tragedies that befell the family of the Prophet? This is the family of the Prophet himself. Yet I mentioned that the propaganda machine, the Umayyad propaganda machine, what did it do? It was able to brainwash the people into thinking that Imam Hussein and his family members were unbelievers. They were rebels. Now we realize. They used religion itself and theology to justify their rule, to say that God is the one who has given us the Khilafah. And so that meant that anyone who disobeyed, anyone who stood up against them, was what? Was an unbeliever. He or she was not a Muslim anymore. So we then now realize the instruments that they would use and how they would brainwash people. And so we find that Yazid, when he tells As-Sayyida Zainab alayha salam, كَيْفَ رَأَيْتِ صُنْعَ اللَّهِ بِأَخِيكَ, how do you view, how do you see what God has done to your brother? We find that Yazid, he justifies his indecency, he justifies his evil acts by blaming God. It's not me, I didn't do it. It is God who punished, it is God who did this to your brother, in such a cowardly way. And thus he strips himself, or he attempts to strip himself of responsibility, of accountability. So this is one position. One that leaned towards absolute determinism. That as human beings we have no choice. We have no agency. We have no free will. Another position, the second, is one that went to the other side of the spectrum, which is absolute free will. We find that this position, in fact, it developed in reaction to the first position. It developed in reaction to determinism. And one of the famous groups who adopted this position, one of the famous Islamic theological groups or schools, are the Mu'tazilis. The Mu'tazilis, they promoted the idea that human beings have both free choice and the ability to translate those choices into physical reality. So it's two parts. Number one, to choose freely, and second, the power to translate those choices into physical reality. And some of them, they went to the extent to say that human beings, they create their own acts. They are the creators of their acts. Now, one reason I think, and there's been scholarship on this, one reason or the drive behind this position was to try to absolve God from evil. After all, these were Muslim theologians. They were not coming from outside the fold of Islam. They tried to absolve God of evil. Why? Because if we suggest that human beings have no choice and they have no agency, that means that people like Yazid, for example, they will come and they will place responsibility of everything good and evil on God. And so can we say that God performs evil acts, or that God is unjust, or that God does oppression? No. And so they tried to absolve God of evil. So they shifted the conversation from God's power and God's agency and God being in charge down to human beings, in order to maintain that God is just. God does not commit injustice. God does not commit evil. This is a second position. The third position is what is known in the theological sources as acquisition or kasb. This position was introduced by another theological school, those that are known as the Ash'aris. The Ash'aris, they go back to their eponym, a man by the name of Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari. Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, he dies around 330 after Hijrah. And we are told that he was a descendant of Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. Who is Abu Musa al-Ash'ari? Abu Musa al-Ash'ari is known mostly for his participation in the tahkim between Muawiyah and Amir al-Mu'mineen. He was supposedly on the side of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He was Imam Ali's representative, but we all know whose side he really belonged, whose side he was really on. Anyways, one of his descendants, a scholar who actually began his career as a Mu'tazili. And then, for reasons that we won't get into now, he decided to break off and he formed a new theological movement which would be known as Ash'arism. And Ash'arism now is one of the prevalent schools within Sunni thought. One of the prevalent theological schools. It continues into the modern period. The Ash'aris, basically, in reaction to Mu'tazili free will, what did they do? They developed this idea that is called kasb, or acquisition. Their purpose behind this, and I'll explain the concept in a moment, their drive, their purpose behind coming out with this conception or this concept was to counter the Mu'tazili emphasis on God's justice, which shifted, as I said, power and agency from God, they saw, to human beings. And so they said, this is problematic, because God is supposed to be omnipotent. God is supposed to be all-powerful. God is the creator and the owner of this universe. So how can we consider anyone to come and to put limits on God and say God cannot do this or God must do that? This is problematic. And so when it came to this idea of human free will, they pushed back and they developed what is known as kasb. And kasb it's a complex concept, but just to make it very simple for us. Kasb, essentially, it tells us that power is with God, but it is dispensed occasionally to human beings for a specific action, at a specific instant, in a specific amount. When the decision is made to act, instantaneously at that moment, not before. The Mu'tazilis, they argued that when God creates human beings, He sort of gives them a power pack. Every one of us is carrying a power pack with us, and so we choose and we act according to our will, according to our choice, according to our needs. The Ash'aris and their idea of kasb, they say no. We are fully dependent on God, absolutely dependent on God. Right? We maintain that God is all-powerful and in control. But at the moment in which a decision is made, and we won't go into who is responsible for the decision. I don't want to confuse you, brothers and sisters. But at the moment that the decision is made, that God gives a burst of power, a burst of qudra, it is in a specific instance, for a specific purpose, for a specific act, and nothing more. It's very limited. And so, this is what is known as kasb, that human beings, they acquire power from God occasionally, at a specific moment. This is number 3. This position. The fourth position that we examine is known as the intermediate position. And this is the position that was taught by the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. Sallu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Al-Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he was asked one day, what are your thoughts? What is our position or your position on this idea of free will, determinism, human action, God's power, this whole problem? What is your position? Is it one of determinism? Is it one of jabr? Or is it one of tafweed, absolute free will? And Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he said, neither this nor that. وَإِنَّمَا أَمْرٌ بَيْنَ أَمْرَيْنِ. It's neither all the way to this side of the spectrum, nor is it to that side of the spectrum. It is somewhere in between, an intermediate position. And this intermediate position basically tells us that human power, that the power that human beings have, and the tools that they have that enable them to act, they all come from God. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the bestower of power. We are fully dependent in our power and in the tools that we use in order to act. We are fully dependent on God. Yet, the manner in which these tools are used are based on the one who is employing them. And so they try, here the discussion is to try to take an intermediate position. Not to strip God away from God's authority and power, nor to take away accountability and responsibility from human beings. Because when we come to the Quran tells us, the verses in the Quran, they give us an idea of both of those positions. Many verses in the Quran, they tell us that nothing happens without God's permission. Nothing. Anything that happens in this world has to receive permission from God. If God does not give permission, that specific thing does not happen. It's impossible for it to happen. Many verses they tell us. Yet on the other hand, many verses talk about human accountability, human responsibility. That we will be held responsible by God. That God will ask us on the day of judgment about the life and the time that we spent in this life. What did we do? How did we act? How did we work? And that we are responsible for our own actions and our own deeds before God. So these are the four theological positions. Now, after this introduction to Islamic Theology 101, we come and we ask, what does all of this mean in practice? What does it mean? How do these doctrines, these ideas, how does this position that the Imams, they teach us, that the Quran pronounces and teaches, how does this translate into practice? Does it affect my life or does it not? How does it affect my life? Very simply, brothers and sisters, if we look at our lives, we can categorize everything into two major categories. If we want to simplify everything, we categorize our life into two major categories. One are those things that we as human beings have no control over. Some things in our life we have no control over. Right? Who are our parents? We can't control that. We don't decide who our parents are. This is a decision made by God. Right? It's not me that decides. Others, through specific means, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's permission, and the specific tools that are used by individuals, they determine who is my parent, who is my biological parent. This is not something in my control. I don't control when I'm born, when I come into this life, where I come into this life. This is not in my hands. There are many other things that I may not control, right? Some details of my physical composition, right? Some of them are out of my control. And many other things that we have no control over. Sometimes we have no control over the things that we encounter. Some experiences that we have, right? You're driving on the freeway and suddenly you see that there's an accident in front of you, as happened to me today. And I was late to Salatul Jumu'ah. And the whole freeway is blocked. And you can't do anything. This is out of your control. You didn't decide, right? You were going about your day, and suddenly you were faced with a consequence. You were faced with a reality. And there are many examples that we can think of, things that are out of our control. The loss of a loved one, it's not in my control. Life and death is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And it may be that one day I wake up and suddenly I have news that I've lost a loved one. Just yesterday we have a family, a relative in Iraq who passed away. He wasn't very old. His name is Sayyid Mudhar al-Qazwini. Wasn't very old. He had traveled from Karbala to Kirkuk, northern Iraq, in order to do tabligh, in order to recite majalis of Imam Hussein. and suddenly death came to him. Suddenly death came. We woke up, we saw the news that he had passed on. It happens. It's not under our control. Right? So this is one aspect. One aspect of our life are those things that we have no control over. The other aspect are those things that we do have control over. We have control over many things, brothers and sisters. And we find this is part and parcel of our life. Right? We have control over where to go, where to come. All of you decided to come here tonight. You decided to leave your homes. You had the intention of coming to the masjid, of commemorating Imam Hussein alayhi salam. You had this intention and you made that choice and you came, and thus you are here. Some people, they chose not to be here. Some people chose to be elsewhere. There are many choices that we make throughout our daily lives. Those are things that we have control over. I can control whether I speak or whether I stop speaking. I'll choose to continue, inshallah. There are many things in our life. We have control over them. Now, taking this into mind, some things we do not control, other things we do control. Either way, brothers and sisters, and this is an important point to consider. Either way, our reaction in life is always a choice. Even when it comes to the things that we cannot control. We can't control something. We cannot control an incident. We cannot control something that happens, but we control our reaction to it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. God says, and I will test you. بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ. We are tested with fear. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us with things that make us afraid. We are fearful. وَالْجُوعِ, hunger. وَنَقْصٍ, and a depletion. وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ, wealth. وَالْأَنفُسِ, souls, lives. وَالثَّمَرَاتِ, resources. God tests us. And the tests are there for everyone. No one comes through this life and exits without being tested. This is a fantasy, brothers and sisters. It's a fantasy. This life is a life of tests and trials. This is why we're here. This is why we're here. So Allah says, we test you. Sometimes these tests, they are out of our control. As I mentioned, we gave several examples. But what does the Quran tell us? What does the Quran say? What is the reaction to these tests that the Quran brings forth? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَبَشِّرَ الصَّابِرِينَ. Despite those tests, give good news, Ya Rasulullah. Give good news, glad tidings to those who are patient. Now, is patience, is it something that is passive or active? When we talk about patience, oftentimes what comes to mind is that patience is passive. Patience means that you just wait, that you remain silent, you don't say anything, you don't do anything. This is a wrong understanding of patience. In fact, patience is very active. It's an act. In expressing patience, we are acting, we are doing something. In fact, patience cannot be patience unless it is actually put into practice. That's what makes patience patience. Right? We're reminded of the story of the mullah who one day he was making dua and dua and dua. And he says, "Oh my Lord, give me this, give me that. Oh my Lord, please give me patience and please give it to me quickly." It's an act. You have to put it into practice. It's only when we put patience, we actively are patient, we actively put it into practice, that we develop patience. So it's very much an action. It's very much active. It is not passive at all. Our reaction is always a choice, brothers and sisters. I read a story about, the story is narrated by a man who works at a restaurant. And he's telling a story about the restaurant manager, someone who he knows. And he says, this restaurant manager was not like any other person that he had met. He says, this guy, he was always positive. He's kind of like the person who you love to hate. Why? Because every time he's asked, how are you? He says, his answer is, if I were to be better, I would be a twin. I would have to have a twin. He's always positive. Always. And this man, he says, this person was so positive that when he would switch restaurants, that some of the waiters and some of those who would work at those restaurants, they would also move with him. This is how his personality was so positive that he would attract people with him. They would also shift their jobs with him. And always, every time he's asked, he says, one day I got really annoyed. And so I went to him and I said, why are you always so happy? Why are you always so positive? Don't you have any problems in your life? Doesn't anything make you angry? Doesn't it make you impatient? So he replied to me, he said, of course. Of course, I have problems in my life. But let me tell you something. I have realized that I always have a choice. That even the things that I cannot control, I have a choice of how to react to them. And so I wake up in the morning and I remind myself, listen, you have a choice of either being happy or sad, and I choose to be happy. When I'm faced with a difficulty, someone is complaining to me, I have a choice of either listening to them and agreeing with them, or a choice of trying to encourage them to look at the bright side, and I choose the latter. I make that choice. I have a choice of being calm or being angry, and I choose to be calm. So he says, the man continues with the story, he says, we parted ways and we lost contact for several years, and then in the news I found out that a terrible tragedy had happened to him. That he was in a restaurant and he had accidentally forgotten the back door of the restaurant open, and burglars had entered into the restaurant and they had held him at gunpoint, and he was so nervous, so scared, that his fingers slipped. He wasn't able to open the safe, so they shot him. And he was taken to the hospital. He was taken to the ER. And he says he went through many surgeries and several months of intensive care, and then he came out. He says, I went to visit him. And I began to ask him, when I first saw him, I told him, how are you? He says, you know what? I'm doing so good. If I'm better, I would be a twin. You want to see my scars? He says, no, I don't want to see your scars. But I want to ask you, what happened? Tell me. He says, well, this is what happened. I forgot to lock the back door, and they entered, and they shot me, and I remember myself, being taken to the hospital, and the doctors, at that moment, the doctors and the nurses, they began to ask me, are you allergic to anything? And he says, I turned to them, and I said, yes, yes. So they stopped in anticipation. They're waiting to see what my answer is. They said, what are you allergic to? He said, well, I'm allergic to bullets. So then he turned to them. They began to laugh like you did. He turned to them and he told them, listen. He said that when I was there, when I looked at their faces, I saw that their faces were not very encouraging. Their faces, they were looking at me in a way in which they were telling me that khalas, there's no chance. So I looked straight at them in the eye and I told them, listen, I know this is bad, but today I am choosing to live and I want you to operate on me as though I am alive. Don't consider me dead. Life and death is in the hands of God. But we are the ones who react. The reactions we have to what is good, to what is easy, to what is bad, to what is difficult, the reactions are with us, brothers and sisters. We decide. We decide how we want to live our lives just today, earlier today. I was watching a video of a young scholar, a sheikh, I know him. He was speaking, giving a majlis. And this sheikh, just last month, or the month before, end of July, his wife was due, she was pregnant, she was due to give birth. He took her to the hospital, and within a matter of 2 days, he lost both his wife and the child, both of them, due to complications. And I was listening to him today, and he gave a very strong message. I had not heard such a strong message in a while. And he said, let me tell you something, lots and lots of people since then have come to me and said, oh Shaykh, how are you doing? How are you coping? What are you doing? This is a tragedy for you. And he says in the beginning, of course, I was heartbroken. This was a major tragedy for me. But then I began to recall. I began to think, what is this tragedy of mine compared to the other tragedies that are happening in the world? Someone goes in to a restaurant, to a school, to a shop, and murders several children, several innocent people at once, immediately. Someone, God forbid, goes and blows himself up somewhere, killing innocent people. The mass shootings that we see all the time, innocent people dying left and right, people living in poverty, people living in war, in destruction, bombs falling on them every single day. And so he says, I think about all of the problems, all of the tragedies that are occurring, and then I realize how small my tragedy is. And even more so, I then remember the tragedies of the Holy Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt. And I am reminded how small my difficulties and tragedies are. This is a decision, brothers and sisters. This is a decision that we make. It is a reaction. We react to those things in life that are good and bad. It's our choice how we decide to react. And this is why we are encouraged to always, in every circumstance, that we depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number one, that we always depend on Allah. That we always put our dependency and trust in God. But this requires that we strengthen our relationship with God. Right? We know this in our day-to-day lives, in marriage, in parenthood, in friendship, that one of the most important elements is what? Is trust. Once trust is built, then there is comfort. Then things can proceed. But if there's no trust, what happens? The relationship breaks down. If we want to depend on God truly, we have to get to know God so that we can develop this trust in God. That we can stand and we can say like Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Imam Hussein, he says, هَوَّنَ عَلَيَّ مَا نَزَلَ بِي أَنَّهُ بِعَيْنِ اللَّهِ. What makes this tragedy easier for me? This is Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein alayhi salam. What makes this tragedy easier for me is that it occurs under the sight of God. God is seeing everything. God is aware. God is aware of the intentions. God is aware of the actions of everyone that is involved. And that there will be accountability in the hereafter. That we have dependency on God, but that we never give up on acting, brothers and sisters. Never give up. Never to have an excuse. We are never justified for inaction. To say, you know what? This tragedy, this problem that I'm facing has no solution, and I give up, I surrender. This is never an option, brothers and sisters. Never. Why? Because number one, we have an all-powerful God who has blessed us, who has given us tools, the capacity to work, brothers and sisters. And Allah says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Those who exert effort, not just act, but they act with effort, they exert effort, they expend effort in the way of God, for God, God will take them to their destination. They will arrive at their destination. Never give up when it comes to acting. There is no excuse for inaction, brothers and sisters. This is what Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his companions, they teach us. Imam Hussein teaches us the importance of dependence and trust in God, but he also teaches us that if we want to change something, we have to do something about it. We have to act. We can't just sit back and pray, only pray that God helps us. This is not to minimize prayer, brothers and sisters. Prayer is absolutely integral and important and essential. But Allah says, I have given you means. Exhaust all the avenues. Do all that you can. Never give up. Continue to act. Imam Hussein and his companions, they continued to act until the very last moments. They had determination. They had resolve. Look at the resolve and determination of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. Look at this man. How determined he was. How courageous he was. How unwilling he was to remain silent or to remain inactive, not to do anything. A few years ago, I wrote a very short couplet, just a few lines, 3-4 lines, in English poetry, I'd like to share with you. And what I envisioned, what I imagined was that Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam, he is after Ashura, he meets with his father, Amir al-Mu'mineen, and he is addressing him. He is telling him, he is speaking to his father, Amir al-Mu'mineen. He tells him, for Hussein I gave my life. For Hussein I gave my life, my dear father, my dear father. Had I more blood, I would have given further. Or another set of hands you'd seen four there. I am Abbas and Hussein is my every breath. I am Abbas and Hussein is my every breath. Look at the day of Ashura. Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam, we are told that he makes several important decisions and choices on the day of Ashura. One of these is when we are told that Shimr, may God's curse be upon him, Shimr ibn al-Jawshan, that he proceeds to Al-Abbas, the camp of Imam Hussein. This is before the start of the war or the battle. That he proceeds and he brings a letter to Al-Abbas and his brothers, his 3 brothers, the half-brothers of Imam Hussein, and he gives them a guarantee that if they were to shift from the camp of Imam Hussein to come to the camp of Umar ibn Sa'd, that they would be guaranteed protection, they and their families. Why? Because according to some historians, that there was, from Al-Abbas's mother's side, there was some proximity of kinship. And so he brought a letter announcing protection to Al-Abbas and his brothers. Allahu Akbar. He doesn't know who he's working with. He doesn't know that Al-Abbas is the father of loyalty. It's possible for everyone to betray, but it's impossible for Abbas to betray. And thus he makes that decision. The decision that he would never betray the Holy Prophet. He would never betray Fatima al-Zahra alayha salam. He would never betray his father Amir al-Mu'mineen. He would never betray al-Imam al-Hassan. He would never betray al-Imam al-Hussein. He would never betray al-Baneen. And more importantly, he would never betray God. And so he makes the decision. And he stands firm. And then we are told that the day of Ashura continues. One by one the companions, they fall. The Ahlul Bayt, it is now their turn. The young men of Ahlul Bayt, one by one, they go out, they fight, and they fall. And finally, when there is no one left, Al-Abbas alayhi salam, he makes a decision. He gets up, he goes to his brother, he tells him, Ya Aba Abdullah, khalas, my patience is done. I have no more room for patience. I want to go out and I want to fight in protection of you and of the women and the children. And Imam al-Hussein, he sees his brother Abbas and he begins to weep. Ya Abbas, how can you go out? You are my flag bearer, you are the standard bearer, you are the commander of my army. If you go out, who will be left to protect the women and children? Who's left? They're all gone. Al-Abbas, he insists, he tells him, my dear brother, allow me to go out. Let me go out and fight in defense of the family of the Prophet, in your defense. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he tells him, my dear Abbas, before you go, I have one request from you. You see how thirsty the women and children are. I want you to go out to bring some water for them. Al-Abbas alayhi salam, he mounts his horse and he goes towards the river Furat. The enemies, they see him. This is the son of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And so they disperse. He is able to break through the lines, the enemy lines that were prohibiting them from reaching the river. He goes and he enters, he arrives to the river bank. He descends from his horse. He enters into the river and he feels the water. Allahu Akbar. Al-Abbas is thirsty. He has not had water for 3 days. In that heat, he is thirsty. He puts his hand and he feels the water. Then he remembers, Allahu Akbar, there is no way that I will betray the women and children. I drink while my master Hussein is thirsty. I drink while the women and the children are thirsty. Impossible, I will not do this. And so he fills the water bag with the water. And then he turns around to go back to the camp of Imam Hussein. We are told that the enemy army begins to attack. They are told, do not let Abbas arrive to the camp of Hussein. If he arrives and he gives them the water, then we will not be able to continue our attack upon them. So they begin to charge at him. Al-Abbas alayhi salam, he fights valiantly. But we are told as he is approaching, he is surrounded, one of the enemies. He comes to him and he strikes him on his right hand. His right hand falls. Al-Abbas alayhi salam, he is still determined. He is still determined. He still wants to act. He does not stop in his place. We are told that he takes the water in his left hand and he begins to call out. He says, Wallahi in qata'tumu yamini inni uhami abadan an dini wa an imam sadiq al-yaqini نجل النبي الصادق الأمين. You cannot stop me by cutting off my right hand. I will continue. We are told another enemy comes and he strikes him on his left hand. Al-Abbas loses both of his hands. He takes the water bag and he grabs it in his mouth. He is determined to continue forward until he is attacked from different directions. He is hit with an arrow that pierces his chest. It pierces his eye. He is hit with a truncheon which causes him to fall off his horse. Al-Hussein alayhi salam, he is watching. He's watching from the tent, from the campsite. And he knows that as long as the banner is standing, that Abbas is still there. Suddenly he sees the banner fall and he hears from his brother, Akhi adrik akhak, my brother Hussein, come to your brother who has fallen. Imam Hussein, he rushes towards Al-Abbas alayhi salam. As he is approaching, he sees on one side the right hand of Abbas is fallen. He sees on the other side the left hand of Abbas is fallen. He proceeds forward and he sees his brother fallen on the ground. He goes to him and he calls out to him, Akhi, al-an qad inkasara dhahri wa qallat hilati. My brother, my back is now broken. I have no longer any support. He goes down. He takes the head of Abbas. He places it on his lap. He tells him, my dear Abbas, allow me to carry you. Let me help you go back to the tent. And Abbas at this moment, he tells his brother Hussein, he tells him, my dear Hussein, I plead with you, leave me here. Leave me in this location. Don't take me back. He tells him, why, my brother? He says, because I made a promise to the women and children. I made a promise to Sukaina that I would do everything possible to bring water for her, and I do not want to have to show up without any water. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا آل محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. صلى الله وسلم عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. صلى الله وسلم عليك وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. All together, brothers and sisters. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات. And for the souls of our departed loved ones, for the soul of the departed Sayyid Mudar al-Qazwini, for the soul of the departed Ayatollah Sajidi, and for all of our believing brothers and sisters, let us recite Surah Al-Fatiha ma'a as-salat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.
برای سلامتی آقای سید هادی قزوینی و خانواده محترمشون یه صلوات محبت بفرمایید. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا حسين بن علي أيها الشهيد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا همه با هم يا وجيها اشفع لنا خوشا جانی که جانانش حسین است خوشا دردی که درمانش حسین است بود فرمان روای کشور ده خوشا ملکی که سلطانش حسین است به چرخ دین نجوم بیشماریست ولی ماه درخشانش حسین است به نامش دفتر توحید مفتوح خوشا آن دفتر که عنوانش حسین است حسین جان با مهر حسین و عطرت اطهر او جوییم توسل به علی اصغر او چون نخ بلند و دست ما کوتاه است گیریم ثمر ز شاخ کوچکتر او سلام بر اون دست کوچولویی که گره های بزرگ رو باز میکنه سلام بر اون لبهای کوچک و خشکیده‌ای که تشنگان عدالت رو سیراب میکنه سلام بر اون قنداقه خون آلودی که در صحرای کربلا دست بابا و رنگین نموده اینقدر گریه نکن هیچ کسی آبت نمیده غیر تیر هر مله هیچ کسی جواب نمیده مادرت شیر نداره تو که اینو خوب میدونی پس چرا زبون تو دور لبت میچرخونی مادرت شیر نداره تو که اینو خوب پس چرا زبون تو دور لبت میچرخونی؟ سلام ما به چشمان گریانت یا حسین، سلام ما به قلب پریشان خواهران و دخترانت حسین جان، سلام ما به اون کودک 6 ماهت، اون کودکی که باب الحوائج نامیده شده، با دستای بظاهر کوچکش گره های بزرگ و باز میکنه. درد داری، مریض داری، قرض داری، آبرو داری، خدا میدونه امشب شب خیلی خوبیه. اگه اتصال پیدا بشه علی اصغر دست من و شما رو میگیره، به خودش قسم گره های بسیار بزرگی رو باز میکنه. جوون دارا آی آبرومندا، درست بلفظ باب الحوائج، اما 6 ماهه امام حسینم خون حسین تو رگ و پوستشه. حالا دلت راهی کربلا کن برای آقایی که به طفل 6 ماه اشرم نکرده. گوش تا گوش علی اصغرش رو پاره پاره کرده. اگه آماده شدی میخوام از ملاقات سکینه با علی اصغر برات تعریف کنم، میخوام روزه بخونم. اگه من حق روزه رو ادا نکردم مهدی فاطمه شرمنده منم، شما ادا بفرمایید. در روایت آمده هنگامی که علی اصغر رو در آغوش امام حسین پرپر شد، یکی از ظالمین تیر به سوی امام حسین انداخت. اون تیر به لبهای امام حسین اصابت کرد، خون از لبهای مبارک حضرت خارج شد. امام گریست، به خداوند عرض کرد خدا من از آنچه دشمن بر من و فرزندان و برادران و بستگانم وارد ساختن به پیشگاه تو شکایت دارم. به خواب راحت جانم علی جان، به خواب طفل عطشانم علی جان، به خواب این کوفیان رحمی ندارن، بخواب بر روی دستانم علی جان، به خواب ای هنجرت 100 پاره گشته، به خواب آرامش جانم علی جان. نقل میکنن وقتی بدن نازنین علی اصغر رو در حالی که خونش به سینه اش جاری بود به سوی خیمه آقا آورد، سکینه به استقبال مولا اومد عرض کرد پدر جان لعلک سقیت اخی ما، ای پدر آیا برادرم اصغر را سیراب کردی؟ امام گریه کرد سر پایین